there is one more important distinction for the social sciences. We have to distinguish between different levels of analysis. One level refers to the macro level, namely entire countries, societies, states. Then, by contrast, we can distinguish the micro level, the level of individual persons and actors, and in between we have what is called a meso level, an intermediate level of organized groups of people like social movements or interest groups, clubs, all kinds of organizations. And an American colleague, James Coleman, put these levels of analysis into a certain pattern of interaction. And he started with a macro level on the upper left-hand side in the picture, and then these are the initial conditions of occurrence in a particular research situation. These conditions then are reflected at the micro level by individual persons perceiving of these conditions, reacting to them in a particular way, and then translating their perceptions and ideas into concrete political actions, still on the micro level on the lower right-hand side. And then these individual perceptions and actions have to be aggregated in a certain way in order to become effective at the meso level. Interest groups, social movements, political parties, all kinds of organizations serve as aggregating mechanisms in order to be translated to the macro level at the upper right-hand side, which in the end is what we want to explain. For example, voting behavior. We start at the initial conditions before an election, the historical, social, structural, political, cultural conditions, then how these are perceived at the micro level, how they are translated into party preferences, how they are aggregated at the meso level by particular political parties, and then the outcome of the election can be explained in this way, following this pattern of interaction which has been nicknamed Coleman's bathtub. It is important also to distinguish that different approaches take a different starting point in their explanations. So, for example, orthodox Marxists start at the upper left-hand side, at the macro level, and translate it directly into an explanation at the upper right-hand side, once more at the macro level, without taking into account subjective perceptions, different kinds of influences for individuals in their day-to-day life, and how then they act and react to such a situation, and how then this is organized at the meso level. And then in this way, in my view, orthodox Marxists just take a shortcut going from macro to macro without sufficiently taking into account the perceptions, the subjective level, the cultural situation, and the kind of meso level, the kind of aggregations which are taking place. By contrast, methodological individualists start at the micro level. They have often very strong assumptions about human behavior, in particular about rational behavior. And in this sense, they then assume that people behave rationally in a certain sense, like, for example, a Homo economicus who wants to maximize his material, his economic benefits. And based on this assumption, this school of thought then translates this into an explanation at the macro level, at the upper right-hand side. But again, these assumptions are contested, and some other authors, like a German colleague, Hartmut Esser, take a wider view of such assumptions, and they talk about resourceful, but also restricted, evaluating, expecting, and then maximizing men or women. And in this respect, we have a broader view of social reality and how this reality is reflected within such a macro-micro sequence. And such a sequence can also be repeated several times. So one election leads to another election some years later, etc., etc. So there is a permanent interaction between these different levels according to your research problem, the particular question you are interested in. And so in this respect, altogether, it is important to remember that we all live in a multidimensional, as we mentioned in the beginning, an ever-changing, quote-unquote, plastic world, plastic subject matter, of which we are all part in our specific ways, and with which we have to deal in our methods and approaches in the social sciences. This makes our efforts to come to grips with this reality all the more difficult, but it is also more challenging and rewarding for our analyses.